history of film began in the 1890s, when motion picture cameras were invented and film production companies started to be established. There are many theories surrounding the effects of fictional media, particularly television and video games, but to what extent are these actually true? This study aims to objectively investigate the ideology and reasoning behind the supposed effects of fictional media. I'll be mainly focusing on modern Western media styles, drawing an end conclusion based on the evidence collated and the reliability of sources. Comic books don't seem to have such a great effect on adult audiences, apart from obsessive collectors. However, for children the potential for negative effects is huge. Ever since the release of Superman in Detective Comics, the early incarnation of DC Comics, superheroes have become the largest part of the comic book industry, and with no age ratings or restrictions, anyone could read them. The first superheroes were aimed at children, but as they began to attract a more mature audience, they grew darker. These images I took straight from a comic book I bought from a market stall. The younger audiences of comics could view these just as easily as anyone else. And with characters like the American icon Superman at the forefront of the industry, parents might not be aware of these darker images. The comic book Batman the Killing Joke is a prime example of a comic that employs darker themes such as insanity. Aside from potentially exposing young children to adult themes, comic books also seem to numb adults to the real world around them. Obsession with characters and collecting merchandise prevents them from paying attention to problems, such as taxes and politics. The media's impact on children is largely through the children's television programs on specific channels for different ages. A web article claimed the best kids show to be Arthur. It said, "The show dives deep into themes of friendship and the importance of getting along with everyone, even, or especially, those who are different from you. The series deftly takes on the emotional and social issues that come with grade school in a way that children will respond to. Episodes deal with topics such as friends who tease you, being embarrassed, falling behind on your schoolwork, and eternally frustrating family dynamics." The fact that this show is still being created after 20 years shows its popularity. The program is translating good messages to children, and more, they are enjoying and relating to it. This counteracts the argument that children are more drawn to action heroes and TV violence. With action films, children tend to emulate the movie hero, engaging him to violent acts thinking it is acceptable because his hero became successful in the end. With cartoon programs, not everything is good-natured. There are those that show subtle acts of violence and deceitful acts against others, some even more vulgar. In return, children tend to copy the characters and think that deceiving other people is a way to confront their problems. They learn to transfer these ill behaviors to friends. This is a direct quote from Influence.com, a website established by Dr. Abe Bamatrav. Since he has a PhD, I assume this source is credible, therefore proving that children are likely affected by movies and TV shows. Influence.com also said that we are so engrossed in storylines in TV and film that we linger in the plot instead of returning to reality, and this effect might just be the cause of behavioral changes in people, as well as the statement, "The media is largely responsible for inculcating the minds of people with false notions and morbid imageries. They feed the minds of innocent young people with violence and other disturbing issues. They inform people on how to do acts that are deemed controversial to the society." The most extreme piece of evidence is a BBC News article from 1999. It recounts the story of two boys who, after watching The Scream, carefully planned and executed an attempted murder on their fellow pupil. It reads as follows. Two schoolboys who stabbed a friend and left him for dead after watching the horror film Scream have been convicted of attempted murder. The boys, who were both 14 at the time, denied the attack but were found guilty by a jury at Hull Crown Court after 7 hours of deliberations. Judge Arthur Meyerson, QC, who described the case as a particularly difficult one, adjourned sentence pending probation and psychiatric reports. Andrew Robertson, QC prosecuting, said the attack happened near Harrogate, North Yorkshire. He told the court that the boys, one of whom is now 15, watched the film at the house of a local drug dealer, who admitted an interest in Satanism and witchcraft. One of the attackers was said to have taken cocaine at the man's flat before the pair lured their 13-year-old friend to the Burt Crag area. One of the boys then suddenly produced a knife and rammed it into his head. When he tried to get away, the second boy stopped him, and the first boy continued stabbing his cheek, head, and body. The attack only stopped when the victim pretended to be dead. The victim was found by chance 40 hours later by an elderly man out walking his dog. In hospital, a surgeon found he had suffered 11 stab wounds to his head, 3 of which had gone through the skull. The injured boy suffered a fractured rib, collapsed lung, and temporary paralysis on his left side. Mr. Robertson said the 2 boys had planned the attack in advance, and had even brought along a bin bag in which to hide the body. It was by good fortune that he was eventually found, he said. During the 2-week trial, the jury spent 2 hours watching Scream. The film features a group of college students being stabbed by killers who turned out to be their classmates. On a video played to the jury, the victim told police he thought his 2 friends might have been influenced by the movie. Mr. Robertson accused the 2 boys of being obsessed with the film and with knives. He said the boys had drawn pictures of the lock knife used to stab their friend in an exercise book, and had also drawn masks similar to those worn by the killers in the film. The judge said it was up to the jury to determine the film's relevance and importance to the attack. Although this piece of evidence seems to hold a heavy bias against the movie, it is still useful because it accurately recounts the story, and can be seen as credible by the reputation the BBC holds for reliable reporting. The report seems to focus more on the fact these 2 14-year-old boys had watched an 18-rated movie, rather than the fact that one of them had apparently tried cocaine and that they had been spending time with a drug dealer with an interest in witchcraft and Satanism, all of which are far more likely to influence the boys than a movie. However, the previous evidence and the fact that the court felt it necessary to watch the movie shows it's possible that it played a major role. However, the drugs and company kept cannot be ignored, as it seems unlikely that cocaine would have a lesser effect on a 14-year-old than the film. According to catharsis theory, expressing anger produces a healthy release of emotion and is therefore good for the psyche. For example, people may think that killing enemies in a violent video game will help them get rid of their anger. Catharsis theory is elegant and appealing, but it has not stood up to scientific scrutiny. Expressing anger often has the opposite effect of increasing angry feelings and aggressive impulses. Because often people feel better after expressing anger, they incorrectly assume that catharsis theory is true. However, people also feel good after drinking beer or taking street drugs. A good feeling is not the acid test of whether something actually works. This is another piece of primary evidence written by a PhD psychologist, so I deem it reliable. It explains how the theory that violence in video games are a healthy release of anger is not true, and that video games increase aggressive outbursts. Psychologist Brad Bushman, who wrote the article, also said, "Many people think that violent media have no effect because they've never killed anyone after watching a violent TV program or film or after playing a violent video game. It is not surprising that people who consume violent media have not killed anyone, because very few people kill anyone. For example, fewer than 5 people per 100,000 are murdered each year in the United States. It is very difficult to predict rare events, such as murder, using exposure to violent media or any other risk factor. However, murder is the most noticeable violent event to most people, so when they don't have available in memory many cases of people viewing media violence and then murdering others, they ignore the very low base rate for murder and incorrectly conclude that media violence has no effect. This ideology is known as fallacious reasoning, and Bushman makes a good point. People assume violent media has no effect because nothing drastic has occurred in their lives, ignoring the subtle behavioral changes and often blaming them on stress from workload or insomnia. However, a news report on the website of The Independent in 2014 said, researchers from the University of Oxford in the UK and the University of Rochester in the US conducted a study in which volunteers played both violent and non-violent games in which the difficulty level was artificially manipulated. They found that players showed greater levels of aggression if they were unable to master a game's controls after 20 minutes, regardless of whether the game included violent content or not. If players feel thwarted by the controls or the design of the game, they can wind up feeling aggressive, said co-author Dr. Andrew Przybylski from the Oxford Internet Institute. This need to master the game was far more significant than whether the game contained violent material. This is a very important piece of evidence, as it is one of the few that actually counters that of the argument that gaming has an effect. It quotes a qualified researcher, Dr. Andrew Przybylski, and contains the findings of a legitimate research project. In addition, The Independent is widely regarded as a reliable source. To conclude, For comic books, television, film, and video games, the evidence I collected seems overwhelmingly in favor of the idea that violent media causes violence and criminal actions. This side of the argument has more reliable sources and psychologists backing it, so therefore this project concludes that media has a very sizable effect on children, but there is little evidence that it has the same effect on adults. Here are my references used in this video. For more information and appendices and Harvard references, look in the report paired with this video. Thanks for watching.